Anyways,
Yeah.
good old leftist audio. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Labor Unchained. I'm Shiva, this is Avi, and yeah, so anyway, strike support.
Yes. There were two main topics that I've been thinking about recently on the picket lines. And the two major things that have come up, I think, recently one is about how to deal with like reactionary sort of ideas or influence amongst, like working class people, especially working class people in trade unions. And the other one is related to like the idea of the left center coalition in labor. And they sort of like tie into each other and work together. So I guess I'll start off with the more specifics. So in terms of like dealing with reactionary like ideas and picket, like on a picket line or in a labor context, I think the biggest thing to realize is obviously there are things like hate strikes, which are not things that we should be supporting whatsoever. But even
Excuse
when
me,
you're not,
hate strikes?
um, so this is something that has been a thing in America, and they're not super common these days, but historically, it's like a strike to like eliminate, say black workers from coming into a specific work site or things of that sort, things of that nature. Historically, there's a bunch of them. An example, not from the American context, but in the 20s in South Africa, there was like this mass strike movement amongst white workers in South Africa, and a part of that movement, if you will, was to try and keep labor in South Africa white, which was a huge issue. And it took like Comintern intervention into the party in South Africa to actually like sort of get them to go away from their sort of reactionary line of supporting the hate strike. Um, and this is something that American communists have had to deal with. It's something that actually in the American Party, the Comintern had to make a similar intervention in the 20s and 30s, and it's something that there aren't so many hate strikes or explicit hate strikes in America in 2023, but um, you know it's important to delineate when you have a hate strike versus when you have just a progressive strike, if you will, but with reactionary elements that are either being towed along or that are part of what's going on just because that's America. So like a hate strike, a good example of a hate strike, you know, in the modern context, not that this has necessarily happened, would be like um, a production facility. Like, say, this is surprisingly more common than people would think, but like anti-vax nurses, and say you had like anti-vax nurses going on strike to try and like eliminate like vaccine mandates or things like that or anything like that, that could be an example of a hate strike. It targets like it targets people with disabilities and people with like immunocompromised people, so like that would be an example of a hate strike. That thankfully, as far as I'm aware, hasn't happened in modern day America, but it's the sort of thing that you might encounter. Or
The
you
internalized laughing was so hard I almost passed out. It's,
For real, it's much more common than you might think. Like anti-vaccine nurses, not that they're a particularly susceptible population, but those ideas become widespread in the American populace, and sometimes it seeps into spaces that you wouldn't expect. Um, but yeah, so if you had like a strike that was trying to eliminate trans people from a workplace, or a strike that was trying to eliminate like immigrant labor from a workplace, instead of like trying to organize immigrant labor, they were like, we want to kick all the immigrants out of this workplace. Or a strike that was saying we want to kick all the black workers out of this workplace, or stuff like that. That would be an example of a hate strike. And so it's important to delineate But that being said, there are other strikes that are not hate strikes where you will still encounter like reactionary ideas. So, you might have a strike for higher wages in an industry, a strike for higher wages, a strike to eliminate tiers, a strike, that includes many progressive demands that still, has reactionary people involved. And this happens because trade unions are sort of they're mass organizations. And in any sort of mass organization and amongst the working class in general, there are a whole lot of people that sort of have these remaining reactionary ideas from, like the period of neoliberalism, or they just continue to get indoctrinated with them. People with reactionary ideas are all over the place. But, just because you have reactionary people on a picket line doesn't make a strike a hate strike. What makes a strike a hate strike and how you can delineate is generally in the set of demands that they're asking for. So, there's a difference between nurses that are striking now, either with UAW or I think OPIEU, versus, who are striking for higher wages, who are striking for better conditions. And if those same nurses were striking for, say, an elimination of vaccine mandates, to the extent that we have them in America, which is very little, and not really at all. So there's a difference between those two types of strikes, even though it might be even the same people participating in them. And so the difference is that a hate strike doesn't generally raise class consciousness, it significantly lowers that. It divides working class people across a line that is imposed from the ruling class. It divides working class people on this sort of like on lines that are set up arbitrarily around race or around gender, or around all these sorts of like things which are not around class. And when you have a hate strike of this form, it doesn't raise people's class consciousness. It doesn't get people to understand we're all in this together. It says my little grouping over here is in it together against this other grouping of working class people over here. And that's an issue. But so, for example, even though there are like reactionary people that support the UAW for a lot of reasons, because it's a mass organization, within the UAW, the strike that is currently going on is not a hate strike. They're not striking to exclude Black workers. They're not striking to exclude trans workers. Their demands are progressive. They're demanding a higher wages. They're demanding things that actually, like the elimination of tiers in the workplace, which actually, it unifies the class, it unifies the union, and it unifies a broader working class movement. So that's an example of like the difference between a hate strike and a not a hate strike. But even on the UAW picket lines, there's a lot of people with reactionary ideas. You hang out there long enough, you'll see people in Trump hats. You'll see people with, the little, the Iron Cross. You'll see people with that tattooed. You'll see all this sort of shit. But the difference is that in progressive movements within the trade unions, as I was saying, because they're mass organizations, they draw on working class people of all sorts. And this includes working class people with either that are reactionary themselves or still have some elements of reactionary ideology. So, for example, I was having a conversation on a picket line with this guy, and, he was so close to like real, like deep class consciousness. We were having a conversation about the education system. He was talking about how it's fucked up, how it serves profit and not people, how the politicians are in it for themselves, how they don't support, students, they don't support people that learn. And then, you get to the point of talking about like education versus training, how our education system trains people to be workers. It doesn't educate them to understand, how the world actually works. And this would be a progressive demand, but you get to the point, you get to a certain point with people, And then, he starts talking about what he means by indoctrination is indoctrinating people to be gay or trans or stuff like that.
You're just so close, buddy, just so close.
I know. And I think in certain ways, this is like kind of average American in a lot of ways. Like, the average American understands that the political system is fucked, that there isn't really anyone working for them out there, that the rich are assholes and they're all corrupt, and they're just a bunch of dickheads out for themselves. But they still have a lot of, the American working class as a whole, we still have a lot of like reactionary ideas ingrained in our head.
How about them InfoWars?
Yeah. And not even InfoWars necessarily, just straight up like mainstream media, mainstream media pushes these like very like reactionary, homophobic, transphobic like issues. They push them into the forefront and they push class issues into the back. And it happens all the time. And I think the thing to understand is that when you have a progressive strike, not a hate strike, and you're on the picket line with people, you have to fight one fight at a time, if that makes sense. You can't be fighting the fight, if you're fighting with someone about like working class issues and you're trying to deal with like, their issues in the workplace, you have to start with that. You can't like walk up to someone that has these deeply ingrained reactionary ideas and just start like arguing with them about like why they shouldn't be homophobic, because they're just not going to listen to you, and so you need to get these people to understand who their real allies are, to get them to understand that the Democratic and Republican parties, that the fascists, that they're not the allies of the working class, and then it's the communists that are. And you do that by showing up. Like, I think that 90% of organizing is just showing up for people and just being consistent, being like organized, and being, or by organized I mean like being cohesive, and being consistent. Like, try to be the first one out there and the last one to leave. Try to just, if you just do that consistently time and time again, then people out there will realize who their real friends are and who their real enemies are. People will recognize, if you show up again and again and again, people will recognize this person is there and this person is there for me consistently. And in our sort of like very individualized society, like that's something that most people don't see, and them seeing that will like genuinely start to transform their consciousness in very little ways, starting in very little ways, but just starting with, I know who my friends are and I know who my enemies are. And then once they know that, the Communist Party, that the left wing, that the socialist movement is their friend, then you can say, hey, and they know, roughly speaking, who their enemies are. They know the rich are their enemies. They know their bosses are the enemies. They have some reactionary ideas about like gay people or trans people being their enemies, but you start working with that. Once they have that understanding, basically, that they're being fucked over by rich people, you say like, well, we showed up for you all these times, and the reason that we showed up for you is because we have a broader program, which includes the fact that like, which includes like, these rich people ain't your friends, which includes these politicians ain't your friends. And then you say, and generally the best time to do this is not on the picket line, but after a picket line, after you've worked with these people for days or weeks or months, then you go and then you say, hey, like, look at this person. And it helps especially if it's someone that actually keeps showing up, that's maybe gay or maybe trans. Is like, this person has been showing up for you for weeks, they're gay. This person has been showing up for you again and again for a month, and they're trans. And then you say like, are these trans people, are these gay people really your enemies? And you don't necessarily like all of a sudden change everything about them, but you plant a seed, and if you nurture it, it'll grow, and they'll come to understand who their enemies are and who their allies are, and they'll come to understand that like working class gay people, working class trans people, working class black people are their friends. And you have to start
but what
small.
if we get to that point and they start calling me one of the good ones?
then ignore them. then I guess there's always some people you're never going to be able to reach. There are always some people that like you're not going to be able to get out to. But I mean, like that is another thing, which is that like it's better if there's more people that are doing it. Like if you get like 12 gay people to show up and there's these people with these reactionary ideas, then it's going to be a lot harder for them to say, oh, it's just one of the good ones. It's like, oh, there's a lot of people from oppressed nationalities, from marginalized identities that support the struggle for like workplace control, that struggle for like working class people to have some control in their workplace. And so whenever you're on a picket line, especially with like long time established unions that have these bureaucracies and all these issues, you'll encounter this sort of thing. You'll encounter it all the time. And it's something that you have to understand that you can't go in and just start saying you're wrong and we need to do things and you need to do something totally different right away. You have to like build trust and rapport, and then you get them into an understanding of the broader struggle. And this is where some of the sort of every left grouping has their own sort of organizing strategy, and this is where you see the relative effectiveness of these sorts of strategies versus like Trotskyist strategies. Trots will just like show up to a picket line and just hand out their newspaper, which says what they believe, and sometimes they have some like good takes, other times they have some very bad takes. But this sort of tactic of just like showing up once and handing out a bunch of newspapers is a very flawed tactic, because it doesn't get people to actually understand who their allies are and who their enemies are. They just understand, oh, there's these weird people that handed me a sheet of paper that I probably didn't even read. And that's important to understand, that like that is a very shallow type of organizing that doesn't actually get people to really like definitively understand who their enemies are and who their allies are.
We got to stop bringing up trots. I was about to go on an entire trot tirade. I can't with these guys. Just no.
Go off. Go off.
Like if you see a guy dressed in communist swag and he looks like he's from Reddit, it's a trot. If you see a guy dressed in communist swag and he tells you to vote Democratic, it's a trot. If
you see a guy dressed in communist swag and he's telling you to vote for Trump, it's a LaRouche, aka a trot.
Oh God, just like, so hold on. So at the place of work that I work at, tell me why this guy approaches me, sees that I have all my communist pins and everything on, and he goes, "Hey, are communists usually mean? Because you're pretty nice." And I'm just, what are you talking? I mean, I've never met a mean communist. I don't know what you're talking about. He starts describing this burger joint that we've got in town, and he goes, "Oh yeah, there's a bunch of communists that work over there." And like, for some reason, they just keep treating these homeless people wrong. And I'm just, oh, they might be trots. Because that's the
Maybe,
only communist that I could see.
or maybe they're, I mean, people in America don't actually understand what it means to be a communist, so maybe they're just a bunch of Joe Biden liberals,
Oh, God. Bidenism. Bunch of Voshites.
Could be.
So off track. Anyways, go on.
But yeah, so, what really, has an effect in changing people's worldview and bringing them to a higher state of class consciousness is deep organizing. It's not just showing up once. It's deep organizing where you build relationships, where you get to know these people. Even when they have reactionary ideologies, you get to know them at a level where you understand, where you can find points of unity and where you can't. And sometimes you can find points of unity on workplace struggles. You can find points of unity even with this guy that was like, oh, the education system is indoctrinating our kids to be gay or whatever. Even on the education question, there's still points of unity. Like, if we had a communist candidate that was talking about how we need our education system to serve people and not profit, this guy might vote for it. Even on the education stuff, I mean, obviously we wouldn't have a platform of excluding trans people or gay people, but just on the basic issue that this person doesn't understand how the education system works holistically, but they understand that it's fucking him and his kids. Even on that point, you can just be and not just in the, oh, they're teaching kids to be gay, but in the, my kid isn't learning right because my education system, the education system that we have in this country is serving rich people and not the rest of us. Even on that point, you can get a sort of point of unity from that. You can get a core of understanding that the education system serves profit and not people. And you have to work through these issues through struggle, through actually talking with these people and understanding these viewpoints, and not just understanding these viewpoints, but where they come from and how you can combat them. But on core basic issues, you can find points of unity. You can find these things and you can make connections. And, it's through these sorts of points of unity and connections that you can develop a higher level of understanding. So another example is there's this guy I met on the picket lines who's an old-time UAW militant, been involved in the struggle for one member, one vote since the 1980s, been a militant trade unionist since, before I was born. And, this is the sort of person that, you talk to him and there's you talk to him about trade union struggles, and on positions within the trade unions, anything he's saying is exactly the same as a communist would be saying. He's saying we need to reform the trade unions. We need to make them actually fight for people, actually fight for working class people. We need to make them fight, broader fights, bring in the community. We need them to fight the bosses. We need them to win things for people. And we need them to be democratic. This is essentially the communist platform on the trade unions. And there's this broad point of unity on the trade union struggle, but you get him talking about imperialism and he's like, we got to support the US military. And that's not something that we as communists actually got to do. We don't want to support the US military or anything like that. But it's important to understand a couple things. One is that on the picket line, when this person is in that struggle, when we are supporting these people in that struggle, that's not the time to bring up militarism. That's not the time to do that. There is a time for that. And that's when we're doing work in the peace movement. If we're doing work in the peace movement and there's a trade unionist that's a militant trade unionist, do your best to bring that person into that struggle. Do your best to educate this person, but not when you're on the picket lines for, the UAW. Do it when you're bringing this person into an action, a rally or something for, for peace, for, against a war, against an embargo, And this person probably has reactionary views about Russia and China, but like, I think that the Cuban struggle in the US and the struggle for like freedom and like, dignity for Cuba, the struggle against the embargo, is a very good entry point for a lot of these people, because it's just so obvious that they're fucking Cuba, and for no reason, Cuba obviously doesn't represent a threat to the US. And I think there's a lot of people that you can get, through saying like, hey, look at how they're fucking over Cuba. Like, why are they doing this? They don't represent a threat. Cuba hasn't even arguably represented a threat in any way to America or American people since like fucking the 1970s, and certainly not since the fall of the USSR. There's no sense in which Cuba possibly represents any sort of threat to Americans. And, you might not be able to get them on Russia and China, but you might be able to get this person to be like, yeah, they're rat fucking the Cubans. And if you get them to say they're rat fucking the Cubans, then you can, build points of unity around this. And that's essential, is that whenever you're actually organizing, whenever you're doing work on the ground, people are coming in with all sorts of different ideas. They're coming in with all sorts of different ideologies. This is America. The average ideology of an American is just pure eclecticism. They understand they're being fucked over. They understand some of who they're being fucked over by. And they have some really, backwards ideas about other people that are fucking them. And so, you build points of unity around the people that and they know are fucking them. And then you build towards like a broader like struggle. You build towards more of an understanding about how like the US military is also fucking this person over and things of that sort. And you build that sort of points of unity. You do that so that this person who is a militant trade unionist understands that it's not just the trade union struggle, that it's also the struggle for like, the liberation of oppressed people across the globe. And, once you do that, you can bring in these sort of like broader ideas. And beyond just the fact that like, you have people with reactionary ideas, a big reason why, there is this sort of like united front tactic or united front sort of like line is that in America, the left-wing movement, the socialist movement, the communist movement is in a relative position of weakness. And in a relative position of weakness, anyone and everyone that will do work for you, that'll do work with you, you have to like struggle to both like uplift them and struggle to, struggle on points of unity with them. Because, like it can't just be communists out there. Like if it's just, a bunch of lefties with no real mass support, you're gonna have a movement that's weak. You're gonna have a movement that fails. And, fuck it. I'm sick of working class movements failing.
I had an anonymous joke in there somewhere, but I lost it.
I talk too much. But yeah. And I think there's a bad point I think United Front politics, it's a thin line to walk, because there's bad United Frontism and there's good United Frontism. And the bad United Front is where, the communists, the left wing, falls in behind the most, tepid liberal positions. And that's an ineffective strategy. That's just a route towards liquidationism. It's a route towards like, diluting like communist politics. But there is a united front strategy that's effective. There's a united front strategy where, you say, we have our principled disagreements on a lot of things, but, we're coming together to work and struggle in this one area. And in this one area, we'll build unity. And then, as the communists who will try to like take this into another area. And if you're not ready yet to follow us into that area, sure, we'll do what we can. But you have to build this unity slowly, like where you don't. I mean, hopefully, it gets quicker at sometimes, but revolution. People have this idea of revolution. People have a lot of backwards ideas about revolution. A lot of people think, you sell your newspapers or you do this or that, and you just post online about how everyone needs to stand up right now, and that everyone's just going to stand up. That's not how it works.
That does nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Well, it shows that you're out there, if you're out there.
Yeah.
But if you're just posting about, oh yeah, we need to be out there, look at these other people. Hey, you gonna go out there, buddy? No? Then I don't think you're involved.
Yep. And if there's not the like organization, like the actual like following amongst mass movements that like you need to build these like revolutionary moments, or take advantage of a revolutionary moment, then like you're not going to get anywhere, and you're going to end up falling into the same sort of like sloganeering, tactics focused, ultra left sort of revolution mongering that does nothing. And there's also, and that tactic fails because we're not always in a revolutionary moment. And even if people are pissed off, that doesn't mean they're ready to like overthrow the entire capitalist system. And there's also, and so the ultra left side of things is very ineffective, but there's another sort of like, deviation from strategy, which is also very ineffective, which is the idea that we just build it step by step. We get some reforms here, some reforms there, and then all of a sudden, capitalism is overthrown. And that's also an ineffective tactic because, you can't beat a system like capitalism, like step by step. Anytime you make an advance, there will be people pushing you back 2 steps. You take 1 step forward and it's 2 steps back, because like you cannot reform capitalism out of existence. It is anathema to reform, or the reforms that do take place, that do become popular and entrenched, they co-opt, and then you just get like capitalism with a human face or something, and that's still just capitalism. It's just capitalism under a different mask. And so you need to understand that in period, so there are revolutionary moments of rupture, like 2020, everything that happened around the pandemic and the George Floyd uprising and all of that was a revolutionary moment. There was a moment where there was like revolutionary potential, but the left-wing forces in this country weren't strong enough to be able to take that and turn that into a revolution. There were too many people that were still captured by, the sort of like liberal status quo of, Joe Biden and the Democrats. There were too many people that were, just still demobilized. And there were too many people that had these reactionary ideas pervading their entire ideological system. And so what you need to do is you need to build, organization. You need to counter these ideas in periods of relative weakness. You need to build slowly. And then in revolutionary moments, you need to like get right on that. You need to be out in front and saying, this is what we do. This is why we want revolution. We want revolution for all these reasons. This is why we support this. This is the struggle we're in, and this is you need to take these like very popular ideas of the rich are fucking you, and turn that into the entire capitalist class is fucking you, and by the way, you're a worker. The entire capitalist class is fucking the working class, and you're a worker. And you're fucked over by these people in these same ways, even if you look different, even if you sound different. you're fucked over in the same ways. And once you understand that, then then there's this possibility for real revolutionary change. But it happens in fits and starts. And if you're revolution mongering in a reactionary time, you're going to get nowhere. And if you're saying we need gradual reform in a revolutionary time, you're gonna harm the movement. It's as simple as. So you get involved with these struggles, and in this current time, which is not revolutionary, you build those connections and you build that deep organizing, and then you wait for the right time, and then you build those connections in the meantime, and then you use those connections to really like push forward revolution. Yeah.
My bad, my dog's chewing on her puppy pad at the moment, and so I got distracted.
Oh, good.
She heard me talking about her, so she stopped. I like how you understand. Don't be a government dog. Go ahead.
The other thing I was going to say is that I think that, a lot of people, when they're going into spaces and contexts that they're not like familiar with, when you're going to a picket line and you don't know anyone picketing, they kind of become apprehensive about it. And they say, I'm not going to go unless, I'm going with a friend or I know someone that's going. And I think in a lot of ways, that's the exact opposite of how you need to think about these things. Because if you're trying to build those connections, if you're going with people you already know, you're going to end up talking with those people more than you're going to end up talking with the people that you need to be talking with, which are those people that you're trying to build unity with. They are those people on the picket lines that are like struggling for, a decent life. And so I would say that like the best form of strike support, like if you have 5 people that are willing to do strike support, it's much better to get those 5 people to go at 5 different times and like be forced to have those conversations, even if they're not comfortable with having them yet, force them a little bit out of their comfort zone, than it is to have 5 people show up all at once and, not, and just like talk with each other. Ideally you would have like, those 5 people showing up all the time, but it's America. People are fucked. People have shit to do,
Like me, for example, I, for one, would like to be out there, but, capitalism.
Yup.
Thanks.
Yup.
Just
number one capitalism enjoyer.
Just, like, capitalism it sucks. It sucks so much. And how people just, oh yeah, I want to be a capitalist. With what capital, buddy? What capital? You think you're going to be as rich as Elon? With his daddy's diamond mines? Huh? No, that's not going to happen.
Yup. Yeah, so, you gotta build that unity. You gotta build that solidarity and that support. And that's
my
just
bad. Emerald mines. Before people.
Emerald mines in apartheid South Africa.
Like it makes it any better. It's all blood jewels. All blood jewels.
Yo. Yeah. So that's strike support. It's it's not an easy thing to do, because you will encounter ideas and people that have that think and act in a way that you find repulsive, but you gotta do what you can to try and build unity. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you just have to say, we're not about this. We're not about like Trumpism. We're not about some of these reactionary ideas, but you do what you can to try and bring people past that. Play nice.